what I've basically been doing is ramping up companies like Trade Republic, Cru, Cassavo, but also Sender. And and before that, I was also helping Zalando during their growth phase. That was 2012 when they launched 10 different markets. Also worked at Meta, where I've been consulting both HelloFresh and Delivery Hero. So I'd say my track record is really much in anything that goes with digital marketing and also growth, and also AI, obviously, because if you know digital marketing, then you know that nothing goes without AI. And just a few words about Project A. So Project A is an operational VC. So that means that on the one hand side, we have the investment team that is doing those investments. And on the other side, we have the operations unit that is essentially building those companies and helping them succeed in what they're trying to achieve. So we have roughly 100 experts in our team that can span across marketing, as I said, but also data, tech, and so on. And the only thing they do is working together with those portfolio companies to make them successful.
And maybe to frame it a bit, because I know a lot of people know that you have a VC firm, but you don't only invest in startup and scale-ups, right? You also have a PE fund, so you have also experience bringing automation and AI topics within more larger and more traditional organization, I would say.
Yes. So this is also a very different aspect of our work, because I always say the VC part, working with VC-backed companies, makes us sexy, but what actually makes us credible is the PE part, because if you've been working with companies that exist more than 10 years, then you know that their processes are sometimes very broken. And that is essentially really something that we're trying to live, because we know that there's so much potential in those companies, because that's a backbone of the German economy, and something that we're striving to solve, basically.
And I remember when I told you about this event that we're doing, I was mentioning basically, hey, it's about automation, AI, and how do you use that to drive business growth and build companies. Almost from the beginning you were in. Why did you immediately see this as an important topic? You've been very vocal actually about this, in the previous, I think at the last PACON, the conference you just organized, you've been one of the most vocal voice around, AI and implementing it in companies. So why is that? Where does this conviction come from?
So my motivation comes from not so much in VC-backed companies. I do think that obviously there's a lot of potential for those as well. But I also have to be true to myself that those companies are usually not the ones that struggle to implement that, because they are naturally just drawn to those technologies, know that they can do things more effectively and efficiently. But what I'm very passionate about is that we have so many companies that are struggling to use that. So I give you one example where, that was actually, I was blown away by that. But I checked how many companies in Germany actually use a so-called Faxgerät. So I don't even know how you translate that into English, actually. And it was 77%, and that's just way too much. And if you think about growth, then yes, it also means that you're optimizing your efficiencies. But to be honest, what I'm striving forward is that I can release some time of those people so that they can actually do something that is value adding for those companies. Because most of the times they're doing tedious tasks that add no value.
Obviously, I guess the difficulty when you have the kind of organization that you run, you can't directly go to the portfolio companies and say, hey, implement that. Like, you need to show some experience. Did you run some initiatives internally first to implement, and especially when it comes to AI and automation? Can you give us a few examples of things that you've built first internally before you just farm it out to the portfolio?
Yeah, so I think we're also quite lucky, because our team members are usually very fascinated by new technology, sometimes too too fascinated, because then we have our data privacy officer who says, like, wait, before you actually use that. But in general, I think it's a good sign. And just to give you a few examples of what we're doing, so we have the talent acquisition team that functions very much like a sales team, right? Because they do outreach, they try to convert those people and so on. And there's so many tedious tasks that you have to take care of. Just today, they presented basically that they need to usually delete certain files manually, that the matching isn't very easy, and so on. And what they do is, for example, they created a custom GPT to create those job descriptions. Because if you think about how many job descriptions we are creating for the different companies that we're working with, it's a lot. So I think it was like almost like a one full-time FTE for 1 year at the size of that team. I think they're like 25 people, something like that. So it's a lot of work that is going into that. So they now actually, first of all, they automated that process with the custom GPT to create that content, and also now automate the whole process with Make. So if there's one team at Project A that is an absolute Make fan, it's definitely the TA team.
And then do you have a specific process once you go with the portfolio companies and you want to basically implement and start bringing some AI initiatives? Like, do you have a specific framework, a way of doing this implementation?
Yes, so there are two things. One is that the leadership really has to stick or really has to believe into that, because if the leadership doesn't believe in that and also invest time into that, then the rest will not follow. What I mean by that is that sometimes people have a certain ambition, but if they're not familiar with the technology themselves, then they're not credible. So that's one that we always try to make sure that that they actually know what they're talking about, to have realistic expectations to their workforce. And secondly, we're trying to not do that for the sake of the trend or for the sake of AI. What we're really trying to do is like identifying the use cases. And now I mean, I've never been working in a consultancy, but other people in our team have been working in consultancies. And the first thing that they would do is basically screening all the different processes. So map out all the process that has been laid out. I'll give you one example where, for example, Audrey, who you know well as well, so she's been working with one of our PE companies, and that PE company easily consumed, I think, 4 or 5 FTEs to create one newsletter that was sent out in, I think, 3 or 4 different countries, which is insane because, I mean, I've never seen such a process actually. And how you would have to imagine that is that one briefing comes in and then they have to translate it, check it, and so on, and all manually, send out as well. So what she did, she was really mapping out the different process steps and thinking about where basically not only AI or Gen AI can be implemented, but also where automations can help. And maybe that's also another aspect that sometimes I'm very happy that we're now going through this trend and hype around AI because of Gen AI. Or maybe some people also say that it's going down again, but I think there's 2 things to that. One is that we shouldn't kind of mix it up with other aspects like automation, for example. And the other part is, without that hype, I think we would also not be able to yield that potential actually.
Yeah, so I think it's interesting because while there's a lot of potential, like truly breakthrough with what you can do with Gen AI, the biggest impact is actually it's so different that it wakes up people to the need of implementing technology, and in most cases you don't need AI, you just need automation.
Yeah, that's that's absolutely true. But that's fine because if Gen AI makes people use automations to make their processes more efficient, I'm happy.
But then, and especially in this larger organization, how do you help balancing you have this new hype, like, and there's part of this is like there's a major breakthrough, but there's also a part which is just a hype. And I guess in more conservative leadership team, how do you help them navigate the need to go into building things and implementing some R&D initiatives, and at the same time not getting afraid by I just try AI, and because I just use a fancy tool which doesn't do anything, and then I get burned and I stop any innovation. How do you guide the leadership through this process?
Luckily, if the operation efficiency is low, you will see that in the numbers. So that kind of forces them to, at some point, look at that, because it's just like if your processes are broken, there's no way that you can deliver good numbers for more than 2 years, I think. And I think that makes it very easy in that sense. I'd say that at least from my experience, most of the C-level, they are more open to use AI. That for sure. There, it's more about like educating them on like what exactly is possible, what's not possible, what's way too ambitious, and so on. But I'd say let's say if they've been delivering good numbers for 1 year and they still don't get it, give them 2 years, and then that will basically make them need, how do you say, kneel down, or I don't know, bow.
And I guess that's the difficult part because you have some of these. I think you have this everywhere, and as soon, even in technical, and that's something maybe we'll discuss later with Andreas. You have people who have been so long into management that they don't, they're not into the weeds anymore, and now there's so much innovation coming up. How do you make them realize what's possible, what's not possible? Like concretely, when you're talking with a management suite, how do you make them aware of what is possible, what is not? Is it just about like conceptual presentation, or do you just have them actually do things with ChatGPT to realize what's the best format you've seen to spark the understanding and also convey the limitations?
Uh, Two things. I think on the one hand side, definitely the workshop, I can also dive deeper into that. And the second part is that it takes time. It's not like a one-off process, but it's the change that you're triggering here is really over a certain period of time. So for the first one, what we usually do is like a baselining workshop, or we call that AI baselining workshop, where we or where our data team is actually sharing what actually AI means, what kind of forms there are, because sometimes people also mix it up and so on, and don't understand where Gen AI is coming from, and so on, and also the different use cases. So that definitely already helps for them to understand what's on the market, what's possible, and so on. And for the second part, I'd say if of course at some point you will always have those point of not I wouldn't say point of no returns, but those moments in a project where they say, oh my god, that's not what I expected, or I thought it could be way fancy, and so on. But that's really on you then to manage those expectations also early on. And if there wouldn't be not a bit like if it would be a big potential, then we wouldn't have done it anyway, right? But in most of the companies, I mean, come on, like if you automate that's still a gain.
Do you have some examples of meaningful implementation where you were able to deliver like significant P&L improvements through implementation of Gen AI within the portfolio?
Yeah, I think there are two things to that. On the one hand side, when we talk about implementing AI and also automations, we're not trying to reduce workforce. What we're really trying to do, and that means that actually the costs are not really being decreased substantially, but you just try to use those resources that you have now to do something differently that can actually generate more revenue, right? So I give you a few examples of our work where we did improve the efficiency, but were not related to layoffs, because that's usually the first question that comes out of that.
I think there's other way to improve the unit economics than just firing people.
Yeah, definitely. But that's the first reaction that you get when people think about AI and automations. They're like, I don't want to do that because I'm not going to be working anymore. So that's not the case. But for example, one of the examples is that we've been working with a PR consultancy, and you have to imagine that their consultants, they do a lot of media research. So they read through a lot of media articles to consult their clients and so on. So that's really, really huge. And we essentially built together with 3 engineers within 3 months a RAG model that those consultants can basically use to reduce the time spent on those media analysis. So that's obviously a huge gain for them, because now they can really focus more on like, how can I adequately consult my clients. They can also work on more clients, because obviously that's right, you just have more time. That's one of the examples. Or also when sticking to that CRM example at the PE company, that was so the CRM team was asked by the CEO, so what are you going to do with your time now? Because 50% of your time is now freed up, right? And their first reaction was, well, I actually don't know. And but I tell you what, that's a very normal reaction, I think, in German companies, because the people are just so used to doing those things. So that's the first point. And secondly, they obviously were able to spend this time on different things that were able to generate more revenue. So I can't remember the exact number, but there was definitely an ROI case behind that. And so maybe I'll just end it here.
It's very interesting because I think from all the discussion we've had so far, one of the recurring theme, which was the less obvious, was that if you actually want to drive a culture of innovation, or if you want, massive adoption throughout the organization of new ways of doing, so automation and AI, one of the biggest pieces is actually to make it a safe environment for people to feel free to do that. And it's true that if people realize that, well, if I automate things, I don't know what my job is going to be. That's a big risk, because then basically in any organization which is running, let's say, properly and profitably, why would people innovate since they're afraid of losing their job potentially? How do you go around that topic? Is it something that you already had to face when coming into some of the PE companies?
Yes, and also no, because most of the companies also have been already going through layoffs, right? So resources was anyway a very big topic, because let's say now you want to, actually that's a very good example. Let's say now one company wants to focus on social media, and then they suddenly notice, oh, I don't actually need only a social media expert, but also someone who creates those assets. And then they've been thinking about, okay, but I still need someone to do that, right? So, and then they were actually quite surprised that you can now also do that with Canvas and so on, right? Because they also have now their own AI features. So that's one direction, but also when it comes to laying off, or when people see the risk that their work might not be valuable anymore, it takes time, because I give you one example. Usually in the tech industry, or I mean, probably not you, but I had a few conversations where engineers did not want to use Copilot or anything else, because they said my code is the best code, and nobody says that obviously that's not true. But if you're not getting the support of those tools, then you're basically putting yourself under the wheel. So that's ongoing discussions that I still sometimes have with engineers at our companies. But I'd say you just have to take that time, because it's not only about laying off people, it's really making them understand that this is like an assistant that they can use to their work, to make sure that they can actually be more productive.
I have to admit, I cheated a bit, because when I prepared this conversation, I took a look at your slides from the project from the conference last week. There was one slide that really marked me, and you were saying, while there is a part of this AI trend which is potentially just a hype, while innovation keeps us on our toes. How do you stay ahead, or how do you make sure that you find the balance, and especially within your team at Project A, how do you get them to assess the obvious questions that the companies in the portfolio will have, and at the same time you make sure you still keep an eye on all the new stuff that are coming, because some of them are hype, but some of them will have a big impact on the future?
Yeah, I always have FOMO with my team because they're always so quick with finding new tools and so on. There are two things to that. On the one hand side, we made sure that people know that this is appreciated and wanted, that they share new things. So, for example, when the data team was doing AI baselining workshops and so on, you would think like, oh my God, but afterwards I don't want to focus too much on, or like I don't want to be not credible or whatsoever. And I specifically always tell people, I don't care if it's bullshit what you're showing us. I want you to look into that. And yes, there's also data privacy, obviously, something that you need to consider. But I want you to still look into that, even if it's nonsense, maybe. But if we're not testing that, then we're not gonna know. So that's one. And secondly, I force every department to present their AI use cases on a monthly basis. So that kind of also keeps up the pressure.
And you say that the VC side of the business is what keeps you sexy, and then you get the creativity from the PE side. How do you also make sure that you stay relevant for the portfolio? Do you work a lot with the portfolio? I guess Project A is investing in a lot of companies which are AI based. I think recently one of your 11x, one of your company was a massive round, is moving to San Francisco. Like, do you work in priority with the company from the portfolio using them, or is there kind of a Chinese wall and we're gonna look at everything because we want to serve the portfolio and not to only use them? Do you have a
Yeah, we do both. So we do also work with the not only with the PE but also VC companies. For example, at Unmind they now also have a chief AI officer, I think it's called. And so there are lots of cool products that the portfolio is already building. But we also, like when we use, for example, 11x, the company that you're referring to, or if we want to suggest them to other companies, then we obviously also need to know how they work, right? So that for sure as well. And I'd say the balance is quite easy because if you work with those companies, you always think about new solutions and ideas and testing different solutions. So I'd say it's kind of, you don't get around that.
If I'm not mistaken, I think your background is in marketing. Is marketing one of the main function where there's a lot of possibilities for AI and automation, or is it one of some, and what are the other ones where you see, okay, that's where we should implement it because there's no-brainers, things to do?
That's my favorite part. So now me as a digital marketing, I don't know, in German you say alter Hase, so veteran. 10 years ago, digital marketing were completely different, where you had, for example, for paid search, which is basically those Google ads that you see, you would have so many different campaigns that are steered very accurately and so on. So you would need, obviously, for those different campaigns, you need a lot of workforce, right? So you had, at Zalando, for example, you had, I think, easily 50 people only for one channel for all their countries. And I mean, yes, they were live in 10 or 12 different countries, but nevertheless, I mean, 50 people for one channel, it's quite massive. So what happened there already is that in this whole optimization and so on phase, Google and Meta, they already invested a lot of money into their algorithms. So that's basically the bad algorithm that is usually being, not liked by by others. But it did make the advertisers much more performant because you didn't need any more 10 different people to optimize your channel, but you were able to do it with just one person. And then the other 9 people were able to focus on completely different things, right? And for a long time in marketing, that was the only, I'd say, jump that you were able to see in terms of AI and also automation. And now with Gen AI, you're also now optimizing on the creative side, because how you would now also, or like 2 years ago, how you would have to imagine that is a creative team of like 10 people or whatsoever to create the different assets, video, photos and so on. And that's much easier now. I mean, it's not perfect, obviously, because you still have to make some adjustments and so on, but it takes way little, or like, how do you say, way fewer resources, basically.
And I guess also it's not just a question of replacing what you're already doing. When I think about AI, I often tell people I'm talking with, think about all the things which are not done, which you could be doing. So maybe if you could afford to have a team of 5 performance marketers, and sure, you'll be running ads, and maybe you can run that with one person. But I'm also thinking about, a lot of, freelancers or people which are starting a small company where you can now do performance marketing. You just, use a bit of, AI and software that will test out and A/B test for you 50 different creatives until you find the right creative, the right copy, all of these. Do you also see some of your company you work with like fully using that, and just one person is running 5 channels and just running everything and generating everything on AI and delivering results?
Yes, definitely. It also depends on the budget, to be fair, because with the budget and the complexity of the product, you also sometimes just need the expertise in the different channels. but it is definitely possible and takes way fewer resources than before. And I mean, before that, you were like your profession was basically adjusting bids and budgets, and that's not something that is rocket science, right? So you want to actually invest into why is a certain channel actually not performing, right? Because if you, for example, invest into upper funnel channels such as paid social or native, then obviously the conversion would be different than for Google search ads. So then you're asking yourself, like, should I maybe change my funnel in that regard? So that those are different questions that you need to answer then, but those are the relevant ones.
And we've talked a lot about marketing, but is this the only function where you see there's a lot of things that can happen today with automation and AI? Are there is it only in marketing that you drive a lot of initiatives in the portfolio, or what are the other main functions where there's like no-brainers?
It's yeah, a lot actually, but CS definitely as well. Anything that is in customer service, also sales, big time, because already in categorization of requests and so on, that's very big. But I'd say in other functions, it's always about basically supporting that, and it really depends on the processes really of the company. But I'd say for like specifically for AI right now, it's a lot of marketing and also customer service and sales.
And when you drive or when you help the different management teams drive these kind of initiatives, what's the main metrics that you look at to assess whether or not it's working?
So what we usually do is that we measure basically like how much time is being spent on a certain task, right? And then that's the operation efficiency. But we're also always making sure that there's an ROI behind that. So essentially like how much time equal to money was spent before on that, and then the one after. And if it's not ROI positive, let's say if it's a process that only has like, I don't know, takes up like 10 minutes in a month, then it's most likely not worth it, right? But we usually look at the time investment.
And then you look at how much time afterwards is spent, and you formulate like some form of ROI.
Exactly, yeah.
And in that part of the process, would you say that what's the biggest difficulty? Is it the technical side, finding the right technical solution, the right AI model, the right AI SaaS, or is it the change management, changing the way people work? Because obviously you don't use an LLM the same way you use even an automation solution, and you don't work the same way. How much of your work is change management, and how much is technical literacy and introduction to the technical solutions?
The more difficult one, and also the one that takes more time, is definitely the change process, because I think taking decisions from a technical perspective, you just need the experts and they get to a conclusion very quickly actually. But what people usually forget is that transforming a process or changing a process, you need to speak to the process owners and users actually, to make sure that they understand that, and that's usually really forgotten. And I think that's also one of the reasons why digital transformation projects are not successful because the users are being forgotten, and sometimes the solutions that are being brainstormed or decided on are way too, I wouldn't say ahead, but it's just very complicated for them to adjust to that. And it takes a lot of hand-holding to make sure that they really embrace it, and a lot of education. I give you one example as well. I mean, it's not really in the sense of AI, but for example, we've been creating automated reports, something that is, I mean, you guys all know about. And that company, like the first time that they saw that report was like, oh my God, that's so many numbers. I don't know where to look at. And that company is making a lot of revenue.
And so in the end, how did you solve that? Did you just make a simpler report, or did you start the automated report?
Yeah, in that case, we created different views to match their use cases. Also, a lot of education and also training on like, hey, this is the data that you should look at. That's the decision that you could take. So kind of like inspiring them to make decisions on that. What you shouldn't be doing is do it yourself, because then they will never learn it. I mean, it's good for the company for this one moment, but if you really want to have a long-lasting impression and also effect, then you need to make them use it.
Super interesting. Maybe a bit more broader question now. As a managing director of Project A, I guess you also spend quite some time thinking about what's going to be Project A in 3 years, in 5 years. How do you see all of the changes that we see now? This automation, AI, the new trends in technology. How do you see that impact your model? Do you think in a couple of years you're going to be a fully automated and AI powered? You'll be able to handle like 100 times the number of customers you're handling right now, or portfolio companies, or how does the future look like for you, or how do you prepare the company for what you think is going to happen?
So that's not everything under my control, but if I would have to imagine, or if I'm going to tell you now what I would envision, let's start first with how Germany could look like in 3 years or even next year. So we just had the election in Brandenburg last week, where, yes, luckily the SPD was winning, but still there was 30% AfD. A few weeks before, in Thüringen and Sachsen, the results were also quite devastating. So then you think about why is that, right? So why do people actually vote for that? And then you also have, I actually got that number from someone working in the union, that in the unions in Germany, so Gewerkschaften, 30% of the people are voting for AfD, which seems super weird, because from a political standpoint, those people actually shouldn't vote for the AfD, right? Because they're not, in their program, there's nothing that is actually for those people. And then you think about why they actually have that voting pattern, and it's most likely because they feel they're basically not participating in the success of the companies, but also because the success of those companies is limited, because the economy in Germany was stagnant or shrank a little bit, actually. And if you look at what's the backbone of the German economy, then it's a lot of Mittelstand. And if you listen to my examples of how those companies in the German Mittelstand actually function, that's pretty grim. So, and that is one of the reasons why I'm very, very, very passionate about bringing across that message to those companies, because I'm gonna be honest, if AfD is gonna be above 10%, or above a certain percentage threshold next year, I'm not sure if I'm gonna feel feel safe here anymore. So there's a big ambition from my side, and passion also to change that. And obviously it's very ambitious, but I feel like that's one of the things that I can control and contribute.
And you think AI and automation is a part of the solution to drive there?
It has to, yeah. Because, just as one example, another fact here actually, in Germany, you know that you need more workers, basically. And we are in Germany, we are a population that is shrinking because we're getting older. So it gets more difficult to get workers. And then on the other side, obviously migration could be a solution to the problem, but you know what the discussions are around that topic. And then on the other side, even if we decide now, okay, we're actually open for immigration, Germany is not attractive as a country. So we really need to step up our game.
And well, it's difficult to go from there, but
sorry.
For the few people in the room, which are either founders or leaders of organization, and who are still doubting whether or not they should embrace this change and going into more AI, more automation, what kind of advice would you give them to help them navigate this evolving landscape, and how to make the decision?
So you mean for the founders?
Yes, for the founders or for the leaders of the more traditional company, where to look to get inspired of other places that potentially are taking this evolution a bit better.
sounds weird, but look at the US and China, because they barely have any regulations. I think that's also scary, to be honest, especially in China. But that's, I'd say, like the benchmark of what you could think about how things can work.
So I have one question for you. Besides, no, besides the deep patient I heard for helping the Mittelstand, what are what are the topics you focus on right now? What are the things? Are you hiring people? What are you looking for these days?
Yeah, quite a lot. So it's definitely a lot about the AI topic. Also, a lot of my time also goes into working with the portfolio companies. Obviously, I just came back yesterday from Stockholm working with Kru. A lot of time is also going right now into hiring because we're looking for a new marketing director. So if you want to lead the marketing team at Project A, then let me know. And those are actually the really main priorities. We're also thinking about how we can make ourselves ready for 2025, obviously. So the planning process also kicking off. But yeah, I'd say those are the key priorities right
Okay,
now.
so these are the person. If you match one of these criteria, you should come and talk to Tian. Tian, thanks a lot for joining us today, being
Thank
here.
you.
Thanks,
Thank you
thanks
for
very much.
inviting me. Thank you.